Hello, welcome back to my channel. Now, every year towards the end of June, I fly off to Italy and the city of Bologna, where they have the Il Cinema Ritrovato festival. Now, this is a fantastic 10-day festival for cinephiles, and it's all about movies that have been forgotten and found again, or have been restored, or have been rediscovered, right? So the concentration is on old movies. And it's a chance to discover really interesting movies that have been overlooked, or to reappraise movies that you've seen before but now have been restored to all their former glory. This year, right, I think the programming was a bit mediocre. It wasn't as good as normal, and there weren't as many discoveries that I made. So I spent most of the week watching old favourites on the big screen with an audience in new restorations and reappraising them. So I'm going to do a top 10 of the movies that I saw at Bologna, and most of them are movies that I've seen before but have reappraised. So it's a bit of a mix, a bit of a grab bag. So I started off the week by going to see Hitchcock's Lifeboat on the big screen. Now, this is one of Hitchcock's least watched movies, but I've championed it for years. I've loved the film for years, but it was the first time I'd had the chance to see it on the big screen. And you know what? It was one of the best films I saw all week. It's an absolute masterpiece. It's a piece of propaganda. It was made during the Second World War. And actually, it's very similar in some ways to a piece of British propaganda called Western Approaches, directed by Pat Jackson. If you've never seen that, it's well worth tracking down. It's only 45 minutes long. And what Pat Jackson did was, he made a story where this group of people, they'd been torpedoed, and all the people on board the ship were made up of actual original servicemen and Navy people from the army who this had happened to in real life. And they're in this situation where they want to be rescued, but they realise that the U-boat is going to attack another ship, and that if they get rescued, they might draw attention to, away from that ship. And it's about, their bravery and what they're going to do. So Hitchcock's film is very, very similar to that, but Western Approach is well worth checking out. It's also a very early use of colour in a propaganda film in very difficult circumstances. But this movie is a Hollywood movie. And one of the reasons why Hitchcock was attracted to making it was, could you make a 97-minute drama all set on one space, a tiny boat, and make it work? And I think Hitchcock succeeds brilliantly. From the very first moments where you have this fantastic scene where you see the funnels of the ship go down into the water, and then you just see the bric-a-brac of a life on ship float past the camera, and then the camera goes through the mist, and through the mist comes a lifeboat, and there's only one person on it, and it's Tallulah Bankhead, with a fur coat, typewriter in front of her, smoking a cigarette, the epitome of class and sophistication. It's a wonderful opening to a movie, and she's fantastic throughout. And then slowly but surely, different people climb on board the boat, and different tensions start to begin. And these tensions surround a particular member of the boat who is a German, and who we realise was actually the captain of the U-boat vessel. A very good performance by an actor called Walter Slezak. What a name, Walter Slezak. And so what happens is the drama is about, what is the German doing there? Is he actually just a victim like them? Should they treat him the way they treat each other? Or is he actually against them? Is he secretly plotting against them and actually trying to get back to his own ship? And the whole attitude of everyone on board the ship towards the German is what the film is about. And that's why I think it's a really interesting piece of propaganda. The script was worked on by John Steinbeck, of all people. And it's actually very intelligent. It's not simple good and bad. What we realise is that the people of higher class on board the ship can speak German and actually relate to the German better than the lower class people on board the ship. Similarly, we find out that the German is actually the most able person on board the ship. He's the one most able to protect and defend and sail the ship to save everyone else's life. So it's a very complex and clever piece of propaganda. And Hitchcock never puts a foot wrong, right? This could be a very boring film, just people talking to each other on a boat. But through the pacing of the editing, the clever use of camera, who he puts in the foreground, who he puts in the background, he tells the story so that it becomes a really complex and involving drama and really tense. I think it's quite brilliant. I was enjoying it so much, I was laughing at one bit, crying at another bit. It really hit me on every level. I think it's an emotional masterpiece, a really great film. Now, Walter Slezak, also turned up in what was probably my favourite discovery of the week. An old Frank Borzage film from a similar year, actually, about the same year, 1944, called Till We Meet Again. And that title gives you a clue as to what kind of movie it is. Frank Borzage made weepies. He made what were patronisingly called in those days women's films, or melodramas. And this is a classic piece of Hollywood hokum, the kind of thing that critics in the day completely ignored. But now we watch it again and reappraise it and see it's actually a good piece of filmmaking. So it's set in, it's a propaganda film. It's set in occupied France, and it starts in a nunnery. And there's a young nun who just happens to be incredibly beautiful and lovely. And she likes being a nun. And she finds herself in a difficult position. An American pilot is shot down nearby. He wants to get shelter, and he needs to get back to England with some important information. And what happens is that the woman who was assigned to accompany him to play his wife to the border is kidnapped by the Gestapo. So this nun thinks, I've got to do it, I've got to play the woman. So she leaves her nunnery behind, she leaves her vows behind to play Ray Milland's wife as they go dangerously across country to get this information back to England. So it's pure melodrama, right? Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Borzage. He's a director that I've come to know a little bit over the previous years, and I've completely fallen in love with him. So he trades in real sort of three-hanky melodrama, real weepy stuff. It's all hokum. And this movie, from the sets, the dramatic beats, it's all pure hokum. But he finds the reality in that hokum. So that the way you're moved is genuine, because even though you can see the conceit of the story and how your emotions are being pushed and pulled, the people within the story feel real. The emotions feel real. One of the things that surprised me about this story is, it's this very sort of dramatic storyline, but the way Ray Milland and Barbara Britton play their characters is very reserved, it's very muted. Now, an example of this is a key scene of the film. So Ray Milland has this monologue about being a husband and a father, and how absolutely wonderful it is, and how there's no problems at all. Arguments, getting annoyed with your kids, forget it. It's all wonderful. Everyone wants to be married, don't they? And he has this whole monologue, and it's complete treacly nonsense. But Milland and Borzage deliver it as if it's truth. Then what happens is, the girl, who is of course a nun, says rather sharply, I'm not interested in that. It doesn't bother me. And cuts him dead. Now, a lesser director would have him storming off and that's not very nice. And then have a bit of tension between them. Instead, Borzage just drops the scene. They just pick up their things and they move on. It's not turned into a fake emotion. It's kept at the level of realism. And that's what's interesting about Borzage. He has all the opportunities to really put the screws on the audience, but instead he pulls back. He pulls back into realism, while never compromising the story or the melodrama. So in another instance, they have to get on a bus full of Nazi soldiers. And in the middle of this Hollywood hokum, the sense of tension and fear and the reality of these German soldiers on the bus is actually very palpable. And that's what I deeply admire about this movie. I think Borzage really did believe in family life. I think he really did believe in the conservative homilies. I think he really did have faith. He really did believe in the salvation of, God, the Christian God. It's all there. But it's pushed so intelligently and realistically that you buy into it. And that's what I find absolutely fascinating about Borzage. He didn't fight the strictures of Hollywood. Instead, his own personal view dovetailed with it and produced something that you could call art. Now, the next film that I watched couldn't be more different than that. Yes, now we go forward to Britain. It's 1970 and a cult classic, Donald Cammell and Nicholas Roeg's performance. Now, this is a movie, right, that for years I've listed as one of my top 200 films. And it's a film that's fascinated me for ages. But between you and me, I've never been quite able to work out whether I actually like it or not. It's a very brittle, nasty, sometimes cynical film. Hardly anyone in the film is likeable. Hardly anyone in the film really comes forward as a real person and not as some archetype of what the writers are trying to say. Is it a good film? Is it a terrible film? I don't know. I went to see this showing because it was a new restoration by Criterion. And what it had been advertised was, one of the things that's annoyed me about performances for many years, the American producers of performance thought the Cockney accents in the film were too strong, so they had them overdubbed with softer English accents. This restoration puts back the Cockney accents, right? And it slightly irritated me. It was introduced by a guy called Jack Klein, and he introduced all the Criterion restorations throughout the week. And he talked a lot about the visuals, and he didn't even mention the Cockney accents, which is why I was there. Anyway, so I watched the film, and all over again, I had issues with this film. The first half an hour, the Chaz bit, with James Fox trying to be an East End gangster, rather unlikely. It's actually, it's dated. It does come across as being a bit pretentious. It does come across as too desperately trying to say something about the modern world, the capitalist world. The film only really feels comfortable when you get to the house in Notting Hill with Mick Jagger. And Mick Jagger, it has to be said, is not the greatest actor, but he's an extraordinary presence in the film. He's right there at his most rebellious era. And for once, a rock star on film is actually like what rock stars represent in the music world. That's one reason why this film is special. And Jagger is terrific, and he even has his own little music video bit, Memo from Turner, which is a brilliant song, great lyrics. I like that sequence. But as is always happens in a Nick Rogue film, you get the sort of exciting, sexy, experimental start, and then it all sort of slows down. It becomes a bit sort of cumbersome, and, it sort of dawdles around for a bit, and then it gets a fantastic ending. This film is a bit the same, really. And what disappointed me about this film is that what I've always liked about this film is the transference of identity. So that Chaz goes into Mick Jagger's world and starts to drag up, he takes drugs and everything, and he starts to become boho, right? And that Jagger, he's this rock star who's lost his way, but he finds now a new identity, being this hard man, who goes out to meet the criminals. Brilliant, right? But when you actually watch the film, that's not really what happens. They don't really transfer identities. All they do is give James Fox some drugs. He gets a bit high. They put him in a wig, and he feels a bit out of it. That's it. And then Jagger is already quite a tough person, really. He's already there. So that transference, which is the key of the film, I don't think is terribly well handled, really. So it's a film that I find extremely memorable and brilliant in a way, and a key sort of cultural item of Britain in that time. But I don't know whether it's very good. What do you think? Now, talking of British cinema, one of my favourite experiences in the week in Bologna was this. British cinema is having a weird kind of renaissance. When I was growing up as a cinephile, British cinema was boring, it was pedestrian, it was the dullest cinema in world cinema, and I kind of agreed. It was just like film television, right? And the dullest of all English cinema was its B-movies. These were little support features that were put on as B-features to the major American movies. And they were just made to fill up a quota, right? You had to have so much British product on screen. So these cheapo companies just churned out crime thrillers and whatever. No money at all, just stuck them on the screen and took the money and went home, right? These movies have had a second life. They're starting to be reappraised. In Britain, partly because of Talking Pictures, who are starting to screen lots of them. But what's happening is that now people are starting to discover these films and actually quite liking them. Get this right. 2 weeks ago in Italy, in the Cinema Modernissimo, this is a brand new cinema that's been recreated like a 1920s Art Deco cinema underneath the main square of Bologna. I think it was an old tube station or something. And they've created a new modern but 1920s style cinema. It's beautiful. It's a great space. 10 o'clock at night, they put one of these British B movies on a big screen, mostly Italian audience, right? This was made for about £2.50 and a currant bun back in 1961. And we sat and watched it. It was a fantastic experience. Now, it's a heist movie. It's a movie called Strongroom, and it was directed by a real hack called Vernon Sewell. And I loved it. It was great. It was pure hokum again, kind of over the top story. So these guys try and raid a bank. They're a bit incompetent. They don't realise that the manager and his secretary are still in the bank. So they lock them in the vault. But once they've got the money and they're off, they suddenly think, wow, that vault's got no air in it. They're going to die. So what do we do? So then it becomes a race against time to rescue this, this bank manager and his secretary. And what was fascinating was this, that because it was a cheap movie, because it wasn't trying to do anything else than fill up a quota, it was just story. There was a purity in it that actually made the tension and the sort of cause and effect of how things went wrong just so pure that you was completely involved. And so the character and the story, everything was going just towards one end. And it was fascinating to see this in British cinema. This is something we think about with American cinema and American B-movies. But there it was. This kind of crappy little company, I think it was called Theatrecraft or something, made this movie in 1961 for peanuts with, British actors who were just looking for work. One of whom is the actor Darren Nesbitt, who often plays villains. He had big, thick rubber lips. Do you know Darren Nesbitt? I never liked him, but actually he's very good in this film. He really carries it. And it's just a really great entertainment. It reminded me a lot of, many moons ago, I did a video about British noir. And people wrote in to recommend other British movies. And one of them was a film called Cash on Demand with Peter Cushing and Andre Morel, which is also a kind of bank raid drama. And this is a good little partner in a double bill. It's a really good little movie. If you get a chance to watch it on Talking Pictures or on Renowned DVD, check it out. Now, what was interesting was, the next day after watching this British heist drama from 1961, I saw the restoration of Michael Mann's Thief, a heist drama, a bank heist drama, from just 20 years later. But my God, there's a quantum leap. Not just a difference of British and American culture, but the whole attitude to how a heist drama was filmed, the whole attitude to the relationship between the police and the thieves themselves, because in Michael Mann's film, of course, they're very close to each other, they're just as violent as each other. It was like two films from two different planets, but they're in the same genre, only separated by 20 years. What struck me about Michael Mann's Thief, watching it again, I've liked this film for a long time, and for a long time I've said that it's actually Michael Mann's best film, and watching it again, I was right. It is. It's everything that Michael Mann did in his later films, like Heat, like Collateral. He did it here, he did it first, and he did it best. And it's an absolutely superb film, right? It's carried principally by two things. I've never liked James Caan as an actor. He is brilliant in this film. His performance is outstanding. His body language, it's so truthful. You believe everything he's saying. You believe he's this man who's been tossed around by life and he's got to a point where he doesn't care and he doesn't fear anything. And he's just a professional, he just wants to get on with it. There's an amazing scene where he takes Tuesday Weld, who's also very good in the film, for a coffee. And brilliantly, it's set in this diner above a great big highway, a place of transition. This is someone who's never at peace where he is. He's never going to be able to stay. So this key scene of his life is set above a motorway, right? And he has this monologue where he speaks to Tuesday Weld about his life and what his hopes are. That monologue, I believe it's been given to actors as a sort of study thing. His acting in that is quite brilliant. How he didn't get nominated for an Oscar that year is incredible to me. The other thing that carries it is the fantastic score by Tangerine Dream, the fantastic electronic score. If you ever listen to it, look at Beach Scene or Confrontation. That music could not be more 80s. If you can find a more 80s sounding piece of music than those, I'll buy you a meal. It's so 80s, but it's fantastic. I love the music when he goes into the final shootout, which is brilliantly edited, by the way. I love this sort of when they shoot someone, you get the boom, and then it cuts in, in further into the body. I've never seen it done before in a movie. It was really exciting to see that. But the soundtrack is fantastic. Incidentally, it was the second soundtrack that Tangerine Dream had ever done. I also watched on the big screen a restoration of the first film that Tangerine Dream did, which was, of course, William Friedkin's Sorcerer. But I'm not going to talk about that because I thought it was shit. Moving swiftly on. So those two things kind of carry the movie. Just for restoration nuts like me, Jack Klein introduced this screening, restoration, 4K restoration by Criterion, right? And this is what he said, right? What they do now, these DVD companies, they get the director in to sign off the film. And Mann was the first director to take this very seriously, apparently. And he got them to put the film on and the colour grading so that they could exactly match. And Jack Klein was with Michael Mann while he was doing this. And he noticed that Michael Mann was not matching the colour of the original print. He was making it darker. And after a while, Klein said to him, he said, Mike, what are you doing? This isn't the original colour. He says, yeah, I want to make it darker. And I said, well, what am I going to tell these people? And he said, well, just tell them it's better. So they're actually producing a restoration, so-called, of Thief from this Michael Mann now, which is deliberately darker than the original. And what it does is it takes away the 80s look of the film, in my opinion, and makes it look more like a 70s film, more like a William Friedkin film, actually. And I just think, this whole policy of getting directors in, to look back at their previous work, it's wrong, because directors change. I'm a different person from how I was in my 20s. My whole feeling about art is different. If I'd made a film in my 20s, I'd think and see differently now. I'm not going to be true to that artist, that Michael Bartlett then. So this whole policy, Michael Mann, let's face it, is not as good a director now as he was. Have you seen Ferrari? I mean, it's not the same. So don't get him to change the work of the previous Michael Mann, who is almost a different artist. On top of that, he's forced Criterion to put in this new scene, the fisherman scene, which is at the start of the movie, which is the crappiest scene I've ever seen, ever. It's bollocks. It's a bit of cod philosophy, James Caan hanging out with this, fisherman on the bay, saying, isn't it beautiful, like, God's beauty? Wank, wank. It's a load of rubbish. But he's forced them to put in this scene. Fortunately, it doesn't ruin the movie too much. You forget about it. But, that's why we shouldn't ask these old directors to judge the work of the young directors. It's not right. Anyway, but Thief, absolutely incredible film. And one of the things I realised about it, this is the last thing I'll say about Thief, is looking at Strongroom by Vernon Sewell, what Michael Mann did was he pushed, with this very atmospheric music of Tangerine Dream, he pushed the heist movie into being an art movie. The scene where they burn their way into the vault with all the dancing, bits of molten lead and stuff. It's almost abstract. It almost has an abstract beauty with this kind of, pulsating score from Tangerine Dream. The whole movie lifts, it transcends the sort of straightforward reality that you find in Vernon Sewell's film into something more existential and sort of weirdly beautiful. And did we ever see it that way? I didn't at the time. But now I think of Michael Mann's Thief more as an art movie. It's more of an abstract film, closer to Kubrick than it is to Vernon Sewell's Strongroom. Anyway, that's Thief. Talking of iconic performances and iconic American movies, I saw the restoration of 5 Easy Pieces by Bob Rafelson. God, I'd forgotten what a fantastic movie this is. And what an incredible central performance from Jack Nicholson. So complex. And I realised, watching it again, there is no performance in American film like Jack Nicholson before that performance in 5 Easy Pieces. It's groundbreaking because it's so complex. And our relationship to it is so complex because at first we don't realise who he is. And we only realise as the movie goes on that he's got a whole, it's like an iceberg, and that all the bit we haven't seen comes to us, that he's got this whole past in this middle-class family of musicians, and he's deliberately chosen to live, as a sort of labourer on an oil field. And so that many of the lines of dialogue at the start of the film, when he accuses his friend of being a cracker, I'm listening to this cracker, actually take on an extra significance and become more uncomfortable as you realise who he really is. It's an amazing performance, It's a performance where you feel at any moment Nicholson could do anything. There's something so free about it. his movement from anger to passivity. There's nothing like that in American film beforehand. It's a really groundbreaking performance, and it's a groundbreaking film. I love this film. I've always thought it's one of those films, like Sam Peckinpah's Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which is best watched when you're a young guy and you're a bit fucked off with the world. And I saw this film for the first time in about 1920, and it blew my mind. It's like one of those movies where, you're a young guy and you're sitting there going, God, man, yeah, I get this, man. I know how you feel, Jack. Yeah. And when he goes off at the end to Alaska in that truck and poor old Karen Black is left behind, I mean, that is one of the things that scarred me most in my film viewing through the years. But you know what? Over the years, I've read a lot of criticism of that movie, and a lot of sort of posh intellectual critics don't like Five Easy Pieces. Jonathan Rosenbaum thinks it's a bit of machismo. So when I went back to watch it again, I was a bit worried, but actually, I think Rosenbaum and the critics are wrong. And the reason is because that what you see in Five Easy Pieces is something that is now so rare to be almost vanished from American cinema. It is the complexity of character and the complexity of how we relate to any individual. So this is one of the rare American movies that talks about class. This is a middle-class man who's deliberately shirked his middle-class upbringing and is playing at being working class. Now, under modern politically correct norms, that would be a big no-no, right? But back then, Raffleson, American cinema was rebirthing itself. It was new, so you could try things. And so this is a movie that it can be critical of both working class culture and middle class culture. It can also see them, sympathetically, and see how someone moves between them sympathetically, while also criticising them. And I just wonder, could we possibly make a film? Jack Nicholson's character is very unlikable. He's a bit of a bastard. He treats Karen Black appallingly. He shouts and rages at most of the people in the movie. He tries to sleep with his brother's fiancée. He does sleep with his brother's fiancée. And yet we sympathise. And that's a complex work of art. I think we've moved away from that. I don't think Five Easy Pieces is a nasty, uncomfortable film. I think it's a brilliant film. It's a brilliant revelation of character, of a complex character who doesn't easily fit into any compartment. And that's its greatness. And I feel we've lost that. We've lost that attempt to do that. On those lines, let's go to India. Now, the famous director Satyajit Ray, one of his most beloved films amongst his devotees, is a film he made in 1970 called Days and Nights in the Forest. Now, I had watched that film before, but I kept falling asleep actually, so I'd not really seen it properly. I watched a new restoration of it this week, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. But it was something of a departure for Satyajit Ray, whose films up to this time were quite carefully modulated and controlled. But this is a freer film that takes in the spirit of the new times, the 60s and the 70s. And it just follows four young men who go away from the city on holiday together into the country. And they're rather ignorant and rather condescending of the local people. They treat them like dirt, really. They meet another middle-class family, and they start hanging out with them and falling in love with the two women in the family. But it's really a very loose film, just hanging out with these four men who are not particularly likeable, who don't treat each other very well, let alone everyone else, and seem very ignorant of their own class and their own privilege, and the sort of slight disruption that their presence causes in the local area. And what Rai, as an artist, is more interested in is, instead of making a point to the audience and pointing at them with a finger, he's actually interested in holding back and hanging out with these people, not condemning them. We actually like them. We actually think they're quite funny and quite good company. And the movie is all the richer for it. But as the movie goes on, one of the characters becomes involved with one of the middle-class women, brilliantly played by Sharmila Tagore, and through her we see a new reality. The truth that underlies these boys' sort of rather jocular attitude to life. It's a brilliant film. Satyajit Ray was such a genius. I'm going to do a top 10 of his films soon on this channel. I mean, he did everything. He did some of the camera operating, he did the editing, he even wrote the musical scores, designed the titles. Absolute genius. Now, another major director who got a whole season devoted to him throughout the week in Bologna, was Mikio Narusa, who is now regularly called the fourth great Japanese filmmaker after Kurosawa, Ozu and Mizoguchi. I'm beginning to think he's a bit overrated, but that's just between you and me. Anyway, this season was devoted to his pre-war films, which are often neglected. You know, people watch his early silent films and then they jump to his post-war work. So this was a set of films that were mostly neglected. And to be perfectly honest, I think most of them could have stayed neglected, really. The best of the series was a film, it's a well-known film with one of the best titles, if not the best title, in the whole history of cinema. And it's called Wife, Be Like a Rose. It's like the title of a Harry Enfield sketch, isn't it? Anyway, so it's a really good little film. It's a very fresh, almost comic film. And I think it came top of Kinema Junpo's top 10 films of Japan that year. And it's a basic story about a young, modern, professional woman. And her mother has been left by her father. The father has gone off with a geisha, right? And she hasn't seen him for years. And so upset is she by this that she's almost become a poet, and she has her poems released in the newspaper. And her daughter is determined to get them back together again, partly because she also wants to get married and she needs her father there to get married. So she goes off to find her father. Now, what's interesting about this film is it's very well acted, it's very smart. You know, a lot of these Japanese movies from the 1930s are very didactic about the women's place in society and how women often get treated badly. And they're a bit of a bore. And quite a few of Narusa's films in this series were a bit like that, really. But this one's got a fresh, modern energy to it, while still keeping its morality at the front. But what I found interesting about it was very much like a Renoir movie. So this guy's run off on his wife, and he's, to all intents and purposes, a bit of a prat. He's gone off to become a gold prospector, and he never finds any gold in the hills. He's a complete idiot. But we never hate him. In some ways, we can kind of sympathise with him. And when he goes back to his wife, and she's very cold and harsh, we think, we almost feel, are you being too harsh? Are you being too unforgiving? Our sympathies are split. So even though this is a very moral fable, we don't wholly come down on one person's side or the other. It's got that Renoirian thing of everyone's got their reasons. And I think that's part of the reason why this film is so fresh and enjoyable. And it's a good introduction. If you've never watched any 1930s Japanese films, this is a good intro. I would argue, instead of going off to watch Mizoguchi, go off and watch Hiroshi Shimitsu's films of the 30s, like Mr. Thank You and Ornamental Hairpin, because they've got that same kind of fresh, modern feel to them. So I'm coming up to the end of the festival, and I want to go out with a bang, you know. So the night before the end of the festival, I see that they're showing the new 4K restoration of Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon. One of the most visually beautiful films ever made in a new restoration. I could not wait, with that fantastic use of music by Schubert and Handel. And it was an extraordinary experience. I'm so glad I went to see it. One thing really struck me about this film, right? How did Kubrick get away with it? How did he get away with it? How did he make American production companies give him so much money to make films that were so downright odd? I mean, 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's not like any other science fiction film. It's an art movie. It's so slow, it's so statuesque and monumental and weird. And then he makes Barry Lyndon. Now, what struck me as I went back to watch Barry Lyndon is it's a period costume drama film, but it's not made like your average period costume drama film. It's made to replicate in its form and its syntax and its rhythms the music of that period, the Schubert and Handel that you hear very often in the film, which are brilliantly remixed and rearranged at different points. So it sounds different, for example, in the final duel scene as it does when he first meets, Marisa Berenson or whatever. So this period of European history was very formalised, right? It was very ceremonial, even down to the way that armies conducted themselves on the battlefield. They just marched towards each other, even though they're going to be shot down, everything was formalised. And the music is very formalised. So the music that Kubrick uses in the film is that do 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 do, and then that plays again, and then it plays again with a slightly different modulation and a slightly different harmony. But it's the same thing over and over again. And Kubrick's film follows this, right? So the whole visual structure is this. You start on a detail, and then the camera zooms out to create a painting, right? It's, it's like of that period, with beautifully composed with lighting and everything. And that happens again and again. The whole point of the film is it's repetitive. It's in its editing, its visuals. It copies that very formalised style of that time. And you think, how did he get away with this in a commercial movie? Well, he didn't really, because it wasn't very popular. But you thought, God, the bravery of doing that. It's absolutely incredible that he even tried it. And what struck me also about this movie is, in the past when I was a bit younger, you know that scene where the boy dies, his son dies, and they're sobbing by his bedside, and Daddy, will I go to heaven? I thought, why is Kubrick spending so long on this scene? It's a bit sentimental, isn't it? But watching it again on the big screen all these years, it struck me why, right? It's because the boy, Barry Lyndon's son, is the only character in the whole drama who is not using other people for their own gain. He's the only person whose relationships with other people is innocent. Remember that schoolroom scene where he and Bullingdon clash? It's just because he wants Bullingdon's attention. He just wants to like him. And then he goes along with his game in that famous scene where Bullingdon brings him in the heavy clogs and disturbs his mother's musical performance. He just wants to be loved by his dad. He wants to be loved by his brother. He just wants people to like him. He's the innocent. Every single other person in the film is using other people. So all the romantic liaisons in the film are either financial. So remember the Irish girl at the beginning goes off with another man because he offers more money. He originally courts Marisa Berenson because he wants her fortune. Or they are not what they appear to be. So he meets that German woman in the forest and shags her, and then Michael Hordern tells you on the voiceover that actually she's had loads of soldiers. Everyone is in it for something that they don't appear to be in it for, except the boy. He is the one innocent. He's the one piece of purity. So when he dies, that's the moment where Kubrick lets the emotion come into the film. And it's all the more powerful for that reason, because that one piece of purity, that one piece of feeling, doesn't survive in this terrible, ruthless world, this Machiavellian world. And so it made me understand and appreciate that scene all the more. It made me appreciate lots of things about this film. Like Ryan O'Neill. For years, Ryan O'Neill was dismissed as this kind of male model type who got into movies because of his looks. But it's not just that. We've been a bit unfair to Ryan O'Neill. There's an incredible intensity about him. I mean, when his eyes on camera, they just sort of pour out of the screen. They really come out at you. And there's a good actor there. He's a bit stifled by his accent, but it's a much better performance than I think he's been given credit. And going back to what I was saying about Days and Nights in the Forest and about Five Easy Pieces, could we make now a period costume drama which was so respectful and interested in the mentality of the era it's showing, both in terms of fidelity, in terms of production and costumes and houses and so on, but also in the attitudes, in the way people spoke to each other and related to each other. Now, period costume dramas seem designed to push forward modern social mores and modern attitudes, and to ignore the complexities of the way people associated with each other in the past. And I just thought, is it possible to make this movie anymore? And I was quite sad that I don't think we would be able to make it. But I was greedy. I couldn't just leave it with Barry Lyndon. The following morning, just before I had to catch my plane, I noticed there was a little double bill of films. One was an Ernst Lubitsch comedy from the early 1930s, 1 Hour with You, with Maurice Chevalier. And I went and watched that, and it was great fun, very silly. And then I finished off with Summertime by David Lean. Now, this is a very special little film. It was running because they did a season of Katharine Hepburn films. someone I very much admire, but I don't actually like many of her movies. This is probably my favourite film of hers. It was done when she was in her late 40s, and she went over to Europe to make it. And it's a very simple little weepy about an elderly spinster. She's travelling around Europe. She goes to Venice. She feels a bit lonely. You know, right? A bit much, right? There I am, Billy No Mates, on the holes, as a single traveller in Bologna, in Italy. And I'm watching this film about how miserable this single traveller is travelling around Italy. What's wrong with being a single traveller? Anyway, but she is a bit miserable, and she wants to find love or companionship. And she's travelling around Venice, and she meets up with this Italian antique shop owner, and they have a romance. Now, it's pretty basic stuff. I love this film. I really love it. And I think it was the last great David Lean film before he went off and did all these epics like Bridge Over the River Kwai and Lawrence Arabia, which are not really my style. Okay. And what I like about this film is this. It's all about Katharine Hepburn and how she, on screen, she gives a brilliant performance where she shows real shades of vulnerability. She's a sort of sassy, wisecracking, intelligent American woman, but she's also vulnerable, she's sad, she feels lonely. And it's a very good performance by Hepburn. But what I really liked about this movie, and what surprised me watching it second time around, was not just the beautiful cinematography and the brilliant, photography of Venice. What interested me was this. We have a way of compartmentalising film history, don't we? Right? So here's commercial cinema over here, and here's art house cinema over here. Here's underground experimental cinema, and here's, music videos and movies for kids and stuff. And we don't really see the crossovers. But all of those people are listening to each other, right? And this is a very interesting example. If you looked at the European art movie from the Second World War, after the Second World War, so you have neorealism, and then Roberto Rossellini, the great neorealist, makes a series of films with Ingrid Bergman, the first of which is a film called Stromboli. Now, what a lot of critics recognised in Europe after the Second World War was that the great subject of art cinema was the woman, where the woman stands in the modern world, and particularly the couple. And that became the subject matter of people like Antonioni and Bergman, for example, and Jacques Rivette in L'Amour Fou. And it starts in Stromboli. And it starts in this film because you see Ingrid Bergman, this famous Hollywood star, and she's put into a real scenario. She marries this Italian fisherman to get a sort of passport, right? And she finds herself in this village, she's a fish out of water. And what Rossellini did was, for ages, he just puts the camera and follows her as she walks around, right? And he's just watching her in dead time. He's watching a Hollywood star in a real environment and the interaction and the tension of that. And that, to me, is where European art house cinema begins, right? It's that weird tension plus this new observation of the woman, the new observation of the couple. 5 years later, David Lean is making a mainstream romance with Katharine Hepburn, and look at the scenes with Katharine Hepburn. Very at the start of the movie, she's left on her own, and we just watch her wandering around trying to kill time. She goes off with her movie camera, and she's in the crowds of Venice. The actual star, Katharine Hepburn, with real people. David Lean had been watching Roberto Rossellini. That whole idea, that new idea of the woman, that new idea of the person and how we film dead time is in Summertime, right? These things, through osmosis, they integrate with each other, they interbreed with each other. So it's fascinating to me to watch this kind of conventional romantic film, in inverted commas, using and building on what Rossellini has started to show with Ingrid Bergman in Stromboli. That's just one of the many things that I enjoyed about this film. So that was my Bologna journey. I hope you find some interest in those movies. Go and check them out. Some of them are really great films. Thanks very much.